Alright, so today we're going to cover my last topic we talked about on last Monday. It was airworthiness and FAR regulations and stuff like that to understand, to start getting the students' understanding of airworthiness, the importance of it, what they need to look for, what they need to check, how airworthiness is described, and all of that. When teaching a student like this, you're definitely going to want to have our FAR aims out. Also, you're going to want to have a computer because a lot of the regulations we're about to go over are not in the FARs. Another thing you want to go over is understanding how to actually read the FARs and all that important information. I'm going to grab something real quick. It's going to help us to kind of understand how to read the FARs. Let me grab my whiteboard, wipe this stuff off, and we're going to try to... I don't know if the probably going to be backwards in the video as well, but I'll try to point out what everything is. While reading the FARs, I know they can be very confusing. I know I always struggle with reading them for the longest time and how you can really read something and understand it. So when it breaks it down, like when you have a section like 61.205 or 91.205, so we'll talk about today. That's like a section. That's kind of like the chapter or a major point within a book. So let's say like 91 would be the book, 205 would be the chapter, and inside this chapter we have little subparts, we have subchapters, we have sub key elements and points. So those are going to be identified with a letter A, a Roman numeral A, or not a Roman, a letter A. Then it's going to be followed by numbers, etc., and Roman numerals, etc. So when reading it, you want to read 91.205 point A, read that, read all underneath it, and then when you get to point B, it's going to be something different, and it'll follow the same order. So reading a FAR is very, reading the CFRs, the FARs, all that present, it makes it a lot easier to know what you're reading if you can understand it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to give a much more condensed version of the lesson I talked about on Monday, just because the Monday lesson took about 2 hours. And I know for our purposes, I don't want to talk in front of the camera for 2 hours, and I'm sure Mr. Stanchuk doesn't want to watch a 2-hour video on something like this. But what we're going to do is we're going to more go over an outline structure for the airworthiness and all this stuff. So what we're going to go over today is we're going to go over airworthiness standards, normal, utility, and acrobatic, where to find them basically. We're going to go over where you can find airworthiness standards for engines, propellers, and we're also going to talk about airworthiness directives. We're going to talk about where you can find all this information. Today's point of today's lesson and what I'm teaching right now is where we can go to find all that information and dig deeper into it when we find that information. So what we did when we talked on Monday is we took each section, we talked about it, and then we dug into the FARs. That's how we want to teach it with a student. For time purposes and stuff like today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually teach the outlining structure for it, what you're going to find in this information, and why it might be a little bit important, okay? So let's dig deeper into this. So airworthiness standards. The subpart H in part 4 and FAR part 21 discusses airworthiness certification. I got some key points here. So basically, FAR part 21 is going to talk about airworthiness standards, normal, utility, and acrobatic, and how the airworthiness is determined for those categories right there. So it's important to know some key points. I noted that 21.173, which can be located in the ECFR website, discusses eligibility, and that's where we start seeing any registered owner of the U.S. registered aircraft. They must have an airworthiness certificate for the aircraft. So that's very important because, you know, we have to have airworthiness. We talk about what kind of documents on board. We find that in 21.173. Okay, we keep reading. Most important section, I think of this is FAR 21.181. It talks about how long an airworthiness certificate is good for. So I know on my check ride, I always get asked that, hey, how long is airworthiness good for? The answer you always just spit out is, oh, it's always good. You never lose airworthiness as long as you keep up with the maintenance and the required airworthiness directives, which we'll talk about later. Okay, good. Where would you find that? I probably wouldn't have known. Now I know it's FAR 21.181. So 21.181 is where we can go to see how long our certificate is good for. So FAR 21 is going to have a lot of good information about what is going on with airworthiness standards. Another good place to go is FAR 23. FAR Part 23 talks more about airworthiness and classification. 21.2005 2005 talks about the certification of normal category airplanes. FAR 23 2100 talks about the compliance with weight and balance. Load limits are located in and VMC load certification. Those are all found in Part 23. So we all are curious about weight and balance compliance, load limits, VMC information, stuff all that, how to calculate, how to understand it. We're going to FAR Part 23 to locate all that information. And when we talked about it, you know, in the group setting with everyone, we really dug deep into it. And that's important to do with the students because we're going to be able to pull out FAR 23, we're going to be able to show them, hey, here talks about certification of normal category aircrafts. Here talks about the compliance with weight and balance. Here we see load limits, and then we see VMC load stuff, and all that. Okay, so that's really important to kind of start getting the broad picture of airworthiness. And the next thing is you want to start talking about smaller things, because we want to make sure our engines are airworthy, our propellers are airworthy, and then we're maintaining airworthiness directives. So you can find engine airworthiness in FAR Part 35, or 33, excuse me. FAR 33 discusses engine airworthiness in compliance with the regulations. 33.7 talks about the engine ratings and operating limitations. Engine ratings and operating limitations are established by the administrator and included in the engine certificate data sheet. Alright, so within the FAR, like FAR 21, like we talked about, FAR 33, which we're talking about now, there's subparts. Subparts are really good because it's going to kind of describe what's going to be going on beneath it. So, for example, in FAR 33, talking about engines still, we're going to talk about subpart B, which discusses design and construction general. Subpart B is where we're going to find all our limitations and our exact rules and regulations for design and construction of engines. So that's a good place to go just to show your students where they can find information about airworthiness regarding engines. That'd be in subpart B. Alright, now quickly moving to propellers. FAR 35.1, this part prescribes airworthiness standards for the issues, type, and certificates and changes to those certificates for propellers. A lot of words there, but basically what it means, if you want any questions about airworthiness in regards to propellers and how they determine if a propeller is airworthy, you go to FAR 35. That's going to help us out. So Subpart A is always going to be a general applicability, who it applies to, why it applies to, and give me some brief definitions. Subpart B is we're going to get the covers the airworthiness section regarding design and construction, like we had with the engines. Subpart C, I put it in there just because it's kind of cool. It covers the inspections of like bird, impact, lightning. So basically what the point is for that is Subpart C of FAR 35 is going to talk about how a propeller is supposed to withstand certain things, like being hit with a bird, a lightning strike, and making sure it's up to standards and airworthy and meeting those standards. That will be located in Subpart C of Part 35. Okay. One thing that's super important to understand is maintenance. Maintenance and airworthiness goes right together with each other, because making sure you maintain a airworthy aircraft and making sure that you fix things that need to be fixed keeps your airworthiness certificate active and real. So airworthiness directives are a little different. Airworthiness directives are something the FAA is going to publish about some particular piece in your aircraft that is needed to be fixed, updated, or checked. Airworthiness directives come out for different times, and there's different ones for certain things. I remember me and Matt were hanging out downstairs with the Prevalence guys, and they were doing airworthiness directive check on the tail gear or the tail wheel. There was apparently some residual cracking that could happen, and every so many hours they had to go and check it. That would satisfy the airworthiness directive. An airworthiness directive, like I said, is just something basically where a pilot's going to have to go in and check something regularly, or take it to a maintenance hangar and get it checked regularly after so many hours to ensure it's safe operation and safe practice. Basic outline for this, I want to give a basic outline for us and give some brief definitions, and then I'm also going to give another citation for where we can go and find more information about airworthiness directives. Okay, so basic outline is 39.1. Airworthiness directives are found in Part 39 of the FARs. 39.1 is going to be purpose of this regulation. What is airworthiness directives? And it's going to what's the purpose of 39. 39.3, definition of airworthiness directives. What is an airworthiness directive? We've already talked about it. It's the FAA publication of something that needs to be fixed in the aircraft. Okay. What is an FAA issue? When is an FAA issue airworthiness directive? That's 39.5. 39.7, you'll find what is the legal effect of failing to comply with airworthiness directives. So if I get an airworthiness directive for an aircraft that I own and I don't comply with it, what happens? And then what if I operate the aircraft without the airworthiness directive being taken care of? That'll be located in 39.9. And so 39.11 starts to start getting into, okay, what do I need to do? 39.11, what actions do airworthiness directives require? What do I as a pilot have to do? And then 23, may I fly my aircraft to a repair facility? Big question. So I got this airworthiness directive, but I'm at my home airport, my own grass strip. Do I got to bring a maintenance pilot in here to come check it out, or can I fly it? Yes, you can. That's where we start getting into special flight permits and going to the FSDO, and that information can be found in 39.25 is how do I get a special flight permit, and what do I need to do, and what situations do I need to do that. Okay, so some definitions. Airworthiness directives are legal enforceable rules that apply to the following products. Following products, it means aircraft and airworthiness regs are legal and enforceable rules. So they're going to enforce you to do something because they need to do it because of safety. Special flight permits are permitted through the following procedures in 14 CFR 21-199. Basically, what you'll find there is how to operate with the FSDO. Okay, so airworthiness directive is going to offer like a nice segue into our next topic, and that's going to be maintenance, preventive maintenance, rebuilding, and alteration. It's cool because I'm teaching this lesson we taught last week, but this lesson coming up, I'm going to be teaching a little bit more on it. So now as I was digging deeper, I found some more information that I think is really interesting about there's Appendix A about maintenance and what can be described in there, which I'll cover at the end of this. So Part 43 covers maintenance, preventive maintenance, rebuilding, and alteration. So FAR, 14 CFR 43 is going to cover all of that information. 43.1 covers applicability, which means it explains what is covered in the section and who it applies to. 43.2 covers records and overhaul and rebuilding. Rules and regulations to overhaul and other maintenance. 43.3 covers who can do maintenance. Okay, this is super important because it's going to give you a list of who can do maintenance on your aircraft, who can do preventive maintenance, and what kind of like ratings they need to hold. Whether it's a maintenance person who's got a maintenance license or it's a private pilot who just does his check ride 2 days ago. What can I do as a private pilot, and what can I have another person do as a maintenance technician? Okay, one important thing is Appendix A. That's going to give us a list of what we consider preventive maintenance. Also, I found it interesting, it's also going to give us a list of what they consider major alterations, rebuilding, and all this great information that if we have any questions, we can direct the student to look at and they can understand, okay, so here's my list of stuff that I can do as a private pilot, and here's just a list that I'm going to have to get somebody else to do. Okay? So Part 43 covers a lot of regulations and applicability, but Section 91, FAR 91, also talks about it a little bit more. So 91.401 through 407 covers maintenance and preventive maintenance. Okay, so 91.401 says that the owner or operator of the aircraft is primarily responsible for maintaining the aircraft airworthy condition. So what that means, that's where we start getting the question I always got on oral, hey, who is responsible for maintaining the airworthiness of the aircraft? The owner or operator, that's where we get this answer, 91.401. Now, this is 91.43, excuse me, 91.403 is where we see that. 91.403, so that's where we get the answer that the owner or operator is responsible for it. Yet, also remember that it's the PIC's responsibility to ensure that the aircraft's in an airworthy condition. Even though it's the owner or operator's decision and responsibility to keep it in an airworthy condition, it's our job before we go fly it to ensure that proper care has been taken care of. 91.405 talks about the owner must have the aircraft inspected and other means of maintenance whatever requires. That's basically saying, hey, the owner of this aircraft is going to have to get the aircraft inspected and perform the required maintenance whenever it requires to keep it in the airworthiness condition. 91.407 discusses the rules of operating an aircraft after maintenance. Basically, what that's going to mean is it's going to talk about how we get from an aircraft from going down for maintenance to getting back returned to the fleet. 91.409, the next section, talks about inspections. This is a good time to open it up with your student and write out the Aviate and go through each inspection and when it applies and when it's need to be done. I know we did that when we were teaching. For time purposes, I'm not going to get it out and go through all that just because we'd be here for a while talking about each individual one. But this is a good time to show your students, hey, this is where we get the Aviate acronym, and this is where we get our list of inspections, okay? Continuing, 91.411 through 413 talks about other required inspections. 91.417 discusses maintenance records and what should be recorded for each maintenance record. Now, in my preparation for tomorrow's lesson, which I'm teaching, we're also going to talk about what needs to go in those records, what needs to be signed off, what kind of format it should be in, because there is a specific format which can be located here in the FAR. Appendix D of Part 43 covers annual and 100-hour, what needs to be covered in each of them and when they apply. Appendix E and F covers altimeter test and transponder test. So any questions we have about what needs to be covered in our inspections and when they need to happen, you can find it in the appendixes after FAR 43. Keeping going, we're going to continue talking about registration, marking, and title. This is super important because it's important to understand if your aircraft is registered and marked properly. If it's not, you can face a bunch of regulation issues. To look at the information on that, you're going to want to go to FAR 45 and a couple other ones. I think it's 45, 47, 48, and 49. So we have a lot of regulations we need to cover, but we'll go through it briefly and make sure we hit all the important parts. FAR 45 is all about the registration marking. Subpart B is where we're going to find the biggest part. It's all about marking and products of aircraft. 45.113 is where we see our ID data card that we as required in the aircraft. Subpart C is all about nationality and registration marks. So that's why we have an N before our tail numbers, as we find that in Subpart C of Section of FAR 45. Alright, keeping going. FAR 47 is all about aircraft registration and regulations. 47.3 is where we see the requirements to have aircraft registered. So that's where we really see, hey, you need to have your aircraft registered in the United States. That's why before each flight we make sure that registration is also in the aircraft. One thing that's important, registration doesn't need to be visible to the passengers, but airworthiness does. That's also stated here in the FARs back in the airworthiness section, something I forgot to mention. Okay, Subpart C talks about the dealer's aircraft registration certificates. We move on. 47.40 talks about the duration of registration. So it's going to give a date, and it's going to give a time after. It's going to give a date in that regulation, and the aircraft created and registered after this date have a 3-year registration duration period. So after 3 years, then you get their aircraft re-registered. FAR 48 talks about the registering and marking requirements for small unmanned aircraft. So if there's any questions on what kind of registration markings need to be on unmanned aerial aircraft, we're going to go to direct our students to FAR 48, and we can go through that with the students if they want. FAR 49 is recording of aircraft titles and security documents. So any questions about recording of the aircraft titles, security documents is going to go to FAR 49. I'm going through this quickly. I'm trying to keep it under 30 minutes. But big thing with that is you want to know if you need to find something, where you can go and what these FARs are going to talk about. Okay? Alright, next we're going to talk about equipment instruments and certification requirements. That we're going to find in FAR Part 91, and that's going to be a small section in FAR 91. It's going to be probably the most talked about sections in the FAR because as a private pilot, this is stuff we need to know. This is where we're going to start getting our acronyms. We get like the Aero, we get the 8 tomato flames, the grab card D, the flaps, and all this good stuff that we can use to help us memorize important things located in these 91 section. So 91.203 talks about the civil aircraft and the certification required to operate. This section gives us information about what required certificates are needed to operate. We want to read through this with the student because this is where we're going to get our Aero, our airworthiness, our registration, our operating handbook, and our weight and balance. This is where we're going to locate all that information for why that needs to be in there and why it needs to be in there. Okay? 91.9, operating handbook, weight and balance is required to complete the flying manual. There has been some discussion of weight and balance isn't specifically located in 91.203, but it is implied through the completion of the operating handbook. That's why we include it with the Aero. Going on 91.205, probably the most popular FAR regulation in the FAR-AM because this is the required items for day VFR, day, night, and instrument. So if there's any confusion on, hey, what do I need to have to go flying? 91.205. This is something I will make sure we're going to highlight it and we're going to go through it and tab it so you can quickly go to it and relate information. This is where we're going to get our 8 tomato flames, our flaps, and our grab card D. So what I did is when we did there, I got a mat go up and we drew it out. Hey, write out 8 tomato flames, and then I read off everything and they filled it in. That's a great way to do it because then your students seeing, hey, I've got here it in front of me, and now I'm seeing it on the board, I'm writing on the board, and it should start getting in their head that they understand it. Okay? 91.207 is going to talk about emergency locator transmitters, ELTs. The requirement for them to have them in aircraft and the requirement to have them tested is 91.207. 91.209 is where we're going to see the importance and the regulations regarding aircraft lights. The regulations say you must have lights sunset to sunrise. But that's where we can start digging deeper into what is required for my aircraft when I'm going flying and what is not. 91.211 is supplemental oxygen. This is good to go through with the student and just kind of, you can draw it out, kind of build your pyramid up. You start out here, this is where you need to have, if you're above for 30 minutes, you need to have oxygen. If you're here, you need to have oxygen for the crew. And if you're above this, it's oxygen required for everyone. Drawing that out and showing them, the differences in altitudes and difference in requirements is really going to help the visual learner understand how the oxygen requirements change and differ. Okay? 91.215 talks about ATC transponders and altitude reporting equipment. It talks about all aircraft in class Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie airspaces must have ATC transponders with 4096 transponder mode C. It's going to give all the regulations required for certain flight through those airspaces. This is something we want to go through with the student because it's a very good question that you could get asked on a stage check, and of course, or even a check ride, because they want to know, hey, what is the equipment required to fly in Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie, and where do you know that? They can say 91.215. Alright, everyone's probably favorite section. I say that jokingly just because MELs and stuff like that is something that's very hard for people to understand. there's a great checklist we went through just to kind of make it's a little flow of how to use an MEL and when you can't use one, and if there's not one, what do you do? So lucky for us, the Skyhawks do have MELs, which makes it a little easier for us to go ahead and sign off in an operative equipment. What if you don't have that? We're going to kind of talk about some stuff like that. What if you don't have it, when do you have it, and what to do? So FAR 91.213, no person may fly with in-op equipment or instruments unless an approved MEL has equipment list or has a physio left of approval. So if you have an MEL, then you can go ahead and mark that item inoperative, placard it, and remove power source to it so the aircraft that thing is inoperative and you can't use it. That's pretty much what an MEL does. But there is a time when you can go through the section 91, and you can figure out what you can do to keep flying the aircraft. And there's a nice flow chart. We went through that with everyone we were teaching, just so everyone understands how to do that. Now we're going to kind of slowly start transitioning into pilot medical certificates and requirements. This can be located in FAR Part 6123. This is something really we want to read over with a student, just because they can see the requirements for medical certificates. FAA Part 67 is going to talk about eligibility for specific types of medicals. So what we learned in the previous one is that we've learned that there is a first class, a second class, and a third class medical. Okay, so now you can go and take these medical exams, and you can get classified, and you can take a first class medical exam, a second class, or a third class medical exam. So there's differences for each one. There's different tests that the doctors have to perform in each one to ensure that you are a first class medical certificate person. As you go up, third class is the least intrusive, I guess. It's the one that it scratches the surface. Second class scratches a little bit more, and first class really digs deep in your health to ensure that you're medically safe. But where we start to see the differences and where you can actually see the differences is if you go to FAA Part 67. It's going to break down what your eyes need to be, what your heart needs to be, stuff like that. So like the doctors have a base where they can make a decision on if you do certify as a first class or maybe if you're a second or third class. Another thing with medical certificates, and I want to sit here for a second because this is something, my dad's an airline pilot and we've talked about this a lot. The hardest license to obtain and to keep is actually your medical. Anybody with money, time, and effort can get a commercial multi-engine rating. Anybody can get a pilot's license. It's not hard as long as you have money and time available. The hardest thing is to keep your medical. So it's important for us to make sure that we keep our medicals, stay healthy and all that, but it's also important that we don't do something to make us lose our medicals. There's a story of a guy at United. My dad was telling me, I'm not going to say names, I can't remember it, honestly. But the guy got a DUI, didn't report it, and then he flew. The issue with a DUI is you lose your medical. So that pilot now flew without a medical, and he ended up getting canned and fired from United because of that situation. So drinking and driving, alcohol and flying, anything that involved with drugs or alcohol should not be involved in aviation. Those two worlds do not work together. So Part 91.17 discusses the rules and regulations for alcohol and drugs. You will lose your medical if caught operating aircraft under the influence. This is where we start seeing the rules. We see the rules: 8 hours bottle to throttle, and no intoxicated person allowed on the aircraft. That's another important thing because intoxicated people should not be allowed on the aircraft for medical reasons. And we'll get into that when we start talking about high altitude operations and epoxy and stuff like that. But I know my dad's told me stories if he's actually had people removed from his aircraft because they've been intoxicated, and it's an actual endangerment. It's not just to the people around them, but to the own person themselves. So that's something we really want to make sure we understand is Part 91.17 because it's really going to go into depth of how you actually can lose your license, and it's something to be careful of. Okay, now we're going to kind of transitioning to a little bit more brighter topic is flight reviews. 6156 talks about the regulations and what counts as a review flight and what must be covered. Section A covers what must be covered in the flight. So if you got to go on a flight review, biannual flight review, as we call them, this is going to go and tell you what you need to be covered in that flight. Section C talks about the requirements for when a flight review must be completed. That's where we get our 24 calendar months, or like what we call it, a biannual flight review. So as a pilot, you have to go get these flight reviews every 2 years if you don't get a check ride and stuff like that. I think it's somewhere in there when you would not have to. Section D covers when you don't have to complete a flight review. But say you go for 2 years and you don't qualify for something that qualifies as a flight review, and your 2 years is up, you go do a flight review. So you want to make sure you cover everything because you want to make sure it's a legitimate flight review. And you're going to go to 61 Section A to get all that information. Okay. And lastly, I want to talk about pilot recurrency requirements. This is the last topic, but it's also a very important one to understand when you're going through private. Where it's important to understand what this is, and also an instrument. I never understood the importance of this until I actually got into instrument training and understanding where this is located, because I never really thought about being current, because I was flying so much with Liberty. I was always current. But then with instrument, it's you're not doing as many approaches. You're going to lose the currency. So where is that regulation located? Well, it's in 6157. 6157 is all about currency requirement. That's where we get the three takeoffs and landings within the preceding 90 days in the same category. Type of aircraft you're going to be flying. Single engine versus multi-engine. We get our night takeoff and landing experience requirements as well, and making sure those landings are to a full stop. We're going to find that in this section. Section C discusses instrument experience. So that's where we're going to start seeing staying proficient in instrument and what is required and what is required for instrument proficiency checks. That's where we're going to find that in Section D. It's going to cover what's important and what needs to be covered in an instrument proficiency check to keep the pilot proficient and current in the aircraft flying instruments. So I know I breezed through all this really quickly, but my point of this wasn't to dig deep and to really start dissecting apart each one of these FARs. My point was to kind of get across the understanding of where you can locate all this information, what you can do with the information. If you have a question, where you can go. And as a pilot, even a private pilot, we need to have a basic understanding of the FARs and how to read it, because if we have a question, we want to be able to go to that FAR, look it up, understand it, and then not only understand, but then turn it back and apply it to ourselves. Because there's one thing to understand, but it's another thing to take that lesson, what I've learned, be able to find it, locate it, read it, understand it, and then I'm going to turn around and I'm going to implement it on the flight line to ensure that I don't break an FAR. That's the real important reason, is when we study FARs. In the beginning, understanding FARs, you really got to understand the outline and the structure for it. Because if you don't understand how to read the FARs, man, they're the worst to read. I know for the longest time I struggled with it. And it wasn't until I got a little more like instrument and then even commercial that I understand, okay, this is how it's broken down. So this is how I should read it, And it's like really reading a METAR. It's a different language. You gotta kind of interpret and make sense of the jumbled mess before you can really become proficient in understanding it. So that's all for that today. And we're going to talk about more FARs next week.